Right, Kevin checking in. It's early November 2021. So, had about 8 hours, almost 8 hours of meetings today. And then spent like an hour and a half with my fiance on the phone as well. Um, I want to talk about what Seth Godin calls the dip. I recommend reading the book if you feel like you're stuck in life or you don't know if you need to continue pursuing something or you need to actually give up on something. Now, the dip, it actually talks about when do you continue doing something and when do you give up? So entrepreneurship, right? Business, relationships, whatever component in your life, read the book. It's going to help you. But I want to talk about business and the dip in business. So when I was starting my one of my first companies that failed, I was not familiar with the dip, so I didn't know, right? But looking back, I understand it. So I spent 1 year building a software company called Foses, and then I spent another year continuing to try to build it, whilst I should have given up and moved on to something else. Now, back then, I thought that giving up was failure. Changing your mind was failure, right? Now I change my mind every week. Sometimes I change my mind on Monday, I change it back on Wednesday, and I change it back on Friday. I went, it's crazy. It drives my fiance nuts. It drives my mom nuts. It drives my business partners nuts. It drives everyone around me nuts that I change my mind so much. And they say, Kevin, why don't you stick to something, right? Like 2 years ago, my mom would say, why don't you stick to one business? Now she doesn't ask me anymore because she sees that the businesses are growing well. They're sustainable. They're decent. But she used to ask me, and I didn't blame her, but she would ask me, why do you change your mind so often? And the answer to that is because I just gained new information, right? If I just found out something that changes how I look at things, I need to change my mind, right? Otherwise, I'm being ignorant or arrogant, even worse than ignorance. And that's kind of knowing. Do you need to continue or do you need to change? Do you need to continue or do you need to give up? And this word give up, it has such a negative connotation. We think it's bad to give up. We think we should never give up. We think that we need to continue on whatever path we chose. But that's BS. Who decides this? Who is to say that you need to continue on this path that you chose just because you chose it? It's not because I chose to drink one type of beverage one day that I need to continue drinking it the next day. Maybe I want to try something new. Maybe I found out something about that. And the dip, it's it's two things. On one side, it's when you try to build something. There's going to be a period where it's less fun and where you feel like giving up. That's the dip, right? And in that moment, that's what he talks about in the book, in the dip moments, you don't know whether you should continue or whether you should give up, right? Should you give up or should you continue? And the thing with this is, and this is actually what makes it really interesting, some things you should give up and some things you should keep pushing forward. But it's very hard to know what is worth it. As in, are you stuck and should you let go of something? Or are you just in a rough patch and should you persevere to come out on the other end? And now the first time I read this book I didn't get it. The first time I tried to apply it in my life I wasn't able to. But looking backwards and now in my life, I can more quickly realize when is something a dip that I should persevere through and when is it something a dip that I should give up on, right? So my relationship is a dip that I persevere through right now in my life. And I mean, not right now, all is good. But what I mean is, we've had rough patches, as all couples do. And no matter how hard those got, I knew I had to persevere. Now, that applies to my relationship. This might not apply to everyone's relationships. Apply to business. I started a lot of new businesses. I started a lot of new brands and projects, and the last months it's been more and more, and in the next year, 2022, it's only going to be more frequent. Not every one of those businesses is going to work. Not each and every one of those businesses is going to generate enough revenue. Some of them are going to be a waste of time and a waste of money. How do you know? Well, it's when you hit that dip moment. It's by asking yourself, how do you really feel about it, right? And this is very difficult to explain. So I would just recommend reading the book and then reflecting on it. And then ask yourself, in what areas of my life does this apply? I don't know how to teach this. I don't know how to explain this. But it's a feeling. It's something that you cultivate. It's like experience, right? It's like, how do you know how to drive a car unless you learned how to drive and then you drove a lot, right? When I drive the car that I used to drive with, I know when I need to push the brakes to make a certain turn, right? Now, if it's the first time you're driving that car, that specific type of car, right? Like when you start driving a new car, even though you're a good driver, you drive a new car, you might not know the bounds and the edges and the balance of that car yet. You're not as familiar with that car yet. So maybe it won't be as smooth, the driving, right? That's just one example. But if you're really used to it, you kind of feel how it is. Well, the same comes with the dip. The more projects you start, the more times you apply this concept of when should you persevere and when should you give up on something, the easier it becomes to continue pushing or giving up, right? Goes both ways. So there's projects that I start and then that I quit. There's projects that I start and then persevere through hardship. And, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but essentially I wanted to talk about how recently in my life I made the decision to cut some projects from my life because they were not contributing in the way that I would want them to. And at the time when I said I'm going to eliminate these projects from my life, it actually felt bad. But it's afterwards that I realized, wow, this is a good thing. And look, I don't want to talk too much more about this, but I essentially wanted to give you the following piece of advice, and this is the type of piece of advice that I would give myself. So I'm doing this more of a self diary than anything else. It's the following: if you've been working on something, and I'm primarily talking about business, but you can also talk about any other component in your life. You've been doing something for some time, and you kind of feel like you're stuck, then get the book The Dip by Seth Godin and read it. You will thank me. Whenever, not anymore because I know how to do it, but even now, if I was facing a difficult, let's say I had to end a business partnership, or I had to make a really big life decision and I wasn't sure how to move forward, I would read that book and it would help me reevaluate. Should I continue or should I quit on this specific thing? Whether it's a relationship, a friendship, a big life decision, a thing that I did and I invested a lot of time and money in and I need to quit, I will use the principles in that book and use it to guide me in whatever I want to do. It's a big recommendation. Just read the book. There's nothing I can say in this video that's going to make you understand it more than just reading it. It's a very short one, so go for it, all right? Given out, take care. Good night.